This is an AK-47, but depending on the game you're playing, it's also a Kastov, a Vandal, or something completely made up. Some games use real weapons, others are quietly removing them. And if you've been playing games recently, you probably noticed it too. Real-world weapons are disappearing from games. I want to know why, and trust me, this gets interesting because the law, corporations, the public, and politics all have a part to play. Okay, at first I thought maybe licensing had some sort of effect on which guns could be put into games. Every firearm is designed and manufactured by a real company. Manufacturers like Glock, Colt, and FN Herstal are all responsible for the creation of some of the most popular weapons. These names and therefore weapons are trademarked. That means game developers technically can't just use those names without permission. Otherwise, they may be liable under IP law. If they were to use them, then they would require a licensing agreement. Now, think about this, games like COD or Battlefield can have what, like 50, 60, sometimes 70 weapons? If each weapon required a licensing fee, that cost could potentially add up fast, especially with how big some of these games have gotten. It may just not be plausible to pay the ever-increasing licensing fees, and because of that, developers might just avoid paying for the rights altogether. Case closed. Of course, the explanation is not that easy, because we need to understand how much it actually costs to license weapons. So I did some deep research into this and was surprised by what I found. First of all, information surrounding licensing agreements is kind of secretive, with mostly all agreements being private. This is normal though. Agreements like this are not required to be disclosed, with it being common for them to be kept secretive on purpose for contractual and competitive reasons. What I did find though is that Reuters did report that in the late 90s, legal clearances were sometimes granted for little or no money, and that licensing originally was just partly about reducing lawsuit risk. This means licensing isn't as expensive as I initially thought. You see, I was under the impression that these firearm manufacturers were requesting millions for their weapons to be used in games. We see licensing in sport and racing games often charging millions to gain rights, therefore I assumed something similar was also happening here. But that's not the case. So what's actually going on? Well, although this is a great indicator that licensing weapons isn't that expensive, it refers to the 90s where, let's face it, FPS games didn't depict real-world weapons to the level and audience they do today. It is likely these weapon manufacturers are demanding more and more money for every new title. And don't forget, even old games licenses have to be continually covered years after release, or you risk the title being removed from stores. But like I said, there isn't much data regarding the costs of these licenses, so we can't confidently conclude licenses are the problem. What I also found that supports they ain't the problem is that the firearms market is only worth around 91 billion. This is kind of small in comparison to the gaming market, which is around 200 billion. To put this in perspective, the sports industry is worth around 485 billion. What this means is that the games industry has a leverage on negotiations with the firearms industry. With such influence, they can negotiate better terms with the gun manufacturers and realistically shouldn't be able to be influenced. And I'm confident this is the case, as some gun manufacturers choose to not enter into licensing agreements at all, instead allowing the use of their weapons for free because they see the gun's placement as free marketing and brand recognition. Cybergun, one of the most successful BB gun manufacturers in the world, explained that sales of particular guns increase when they are featured in popular video games, showing how powerful this marketing can be for weapon manufacturers. This is all very interesting because it clearly demonstrates that licensing actually has a minimal effect on whether real guns are appearing in games. Yes, licensing costs have likely risen and protection from disputes may be needed. These costs can easily be covered by these juggernaut AAA game studios, and we see much smaller titles, sometimes even indie games, include real weapons. So it makes you question, what else could be causing these real weapons to vanish? Here's where it gets weird. Some gun names aren't actually trademarked. I noticed that some games still use popular weapon names with other fake weapons around them. Well, it turns out developers are actually using the generic name for these weapons and not the real ones. Generic named weapons do not follow the manufacturer's name, instead they follow the gun's model number. Certain weapon names are tied directly to a manufacturer's trademark, like Glock 7, which makes it difficult to use in a game as anyone who refers to the pistol simply does as a Glock and not a 7. In this case, using the weapon would breach trademark law or risk having an unrecognizable weapon, but other guns like the M4, 1911 or MP5 have become semi-generic military designations, being recognized by their model number as opposed to the original manufacturer's weapon trademark. Developers can often avoid trademark issues by removing the brand name and simply refer to the weapon by its model designation. Modern Warfare 2019 is the perfect title when this happens. A lot of their weapons are either fake named or refer to the generic model number. This generic number gives the illusion that the weapon is its real entity. It's clear that a lot of these games are in this transition phase or using generic names, and so far this grey area approach hasn't resulted in major lawsuits from firearm companies, suggesting that game companies are taking a legally safe approach. And this is supported through a case where Colt sued Bushmaster over the term M4 in the 2000s. The court eventually ruled that M4 had become generic in the firearms industry, and that ruling helped cement its semi-generic status. Cases like this set precedent that games are also allowed to name the weapons using the generic terms. But this is where I got confused, because even with these options, the generic weapons are also starting to lose their names in games. Distinctively, COD named the MP5 the Lockman Sub in Modern Warfare 2. In fact, the MP5 hasn't been featured in COD since Cold War. That was 6 years ago. So what's happened in these short years for them to even start ditching the generic weapon names? It's like a mystery. And this isn't just a COD thing either. Even Battlefield 6 has followed trend, with their MP5 called the PW5A3. This showed me that something deeper was at play here, because these developers are actively choosing not to use real guns, and now they're even refusing to use the generic ones when realistically there is practically no legal risk. And even if they needed a license, the fees are either free or of very little money. It became evident at this point that the law was not responsible for real guns disappearing in games. It was something else. Could all of this be a creative issue? With real weapons, the manufacturers have expectations on how their weapons are portrayed. They set demands that include not showing the weapon as weak, used by the bad guys, or even heavily modified, which makes sense because these weapons are their product and directly tied to their name and trademark. Imagine putting all your resources into creating a weapon and then some gaming community just calls it or not meta. With fictional weapons, these barriers don't exist. Developers can do whatever they want, and that creative freedom leads directly to the creativity we see in gun designs in games today. Developers are creating their own versions of staple guns with distinctive alterations that make them unique enough to avoid copyright, trademark, and patent infringement. These alterations fundamentally still stay true to the original, usually combining 2 or 3 features of a weapon to the original model. Like, come on, this is obviously a P90, what other gun looks like that? And it's not just their designs, but usually their features remain the same too. Like a fake P90, the fake will still hold 50 bullets, reload in the same way, have fast fire rate and low recoil. It's practically a P90. This has been a sort of answer from developers, being able to continue using the guns that we have all become so familiar with by staying true to their original and distinctive features by adding just enough to make them different. It has also unlocked customization. You may have also noticed that every FPS seems to have a gunsmith. Nah, seriously, if I have to go through another gunsmith and there's 1,000 attachments, the attachments now also have big cosmetic changes to the guns, often allowing us to either create a weapon that is true to the original or create whatever this monster is. I don't know how I feel about this, as on one hand the level of creativity makes each weapon feel unique to the person playing, but then we lose the originality of the weapon. But all of this just confuses things again, because developers are happy to keep the guns referenced to the originals. I mean, the PW5 obviously refers to and looks like an MP5. If this was truly a creativity issue, then wouldn't it, I don't know, make more sense to actually be creative? Right now the guns just look like some cheap parody of the original. This is my problem with it, because it exemplifies the problem and makes the lack of real world weapons truly stand out. So we can scratch out creativity being the cause of why real world weapons are disappearing in games. In 2012, major conversations began around gun violence in media due to tragic events that occurred in America. At this time, all FPS games were under serious scrutiny from the media, people, and political power. This isn't something new. Games have historically always been at the forefront of blame when explaining the reason for violence and violent events related to guns. Although it has been proved that games do not cause violence, the debate never really seems to go away, especially as gun violence in America continues daily. It seems developers and big corporations have wanted to distance themselves from promoting guns, with major publishers like EA publicly stating they would stop paying licensing fees to gun manufacturers. Them using real-world weapons in the past provided advertising and a sense of use for their players which they no longer wanted to associate with or encourage. We already saw how much of an influence the free advertising was having on gun sales, therefore it makes sense why they have taken this approach. Is this the correct approach? Well, that's a moral question. Gun manufacturers like Barrett hope that the appearance of its weapon in a video game would in time turn young players into gun owners. Quote, "It is hard to qualify to what extent rifle sales have increased as a result of being in games, but video games expose our brand to a young audience who are considered possible future owners. Such a marketing approach gives me a bad taste in my mouth. Should we be advertising weapons to children in anticipation they will grow up and buy one? Absolutely not, and game companies for the majority believe the same. They didn't want to appear financially connected to the real-world weapons industry. And I'm not going to pretend like I know the right or wrong of if weapons should be banned. To be honest, I'm from the UK, so this stuff isn't in my surroundings, and this video isn't here to answer this debate either. However, I am not oblivious to the horrors coming out of America related to gun violence. If game companies can help in reducing gun violence, even in a minimal approach, then I think we should welcome this. However, do I think the approach has been contradictory? Yes, if these developers really cared about not advertising real-world weapons, then why do they still make reference to the original? This gun could be named anything and look in any way they wish, and it can still operate like the original, so why do they not do more to mask it? For some reason they are not fully out of removing these weapons. Maybe it's because of the risk of harming immersion and the setting of the game. Maybe they also fear player backlash. Whatever it is, the morality they are trying to portray is shadowed by the fact that the real gun's DNA is still very much present in all of these games. Do players even care? The release of Modern Warfare 2019 was the real beginning of FPS games diverging their real weapons into fake or generic ones. The game sold incredibly well, and I honestly didn't hear a single complaint about the fake guns. The following games since then have pushed towards more and more fake weapons, and yet nobody has batted an eye. So I don't really think it has had too much of an effect on the overall experience. For die-hard milsim players, games exist where authenticity is at the heart of the game. There you can find real weapons being portrayed in their original and authentic manner. For casual FPS games, we will have to get used to the new reality. Personally, I don't like the push towards unauthentic weapons. The games lose the levels of immersion they are designed to create and makes the setting feel superficial. It's also starting to become interesting to see certain people not know what gun you are referring to when you call guns like the Lockman an MP5. It's sad to see iconic weapons being lost to generic placeholders. Real weapons are disappearing because corporations would rather remove the risk of portraying real-world weapons than face any potential consequences. The benefit for them is that they are allowed greater creative control over their game whilst they minimize legal consequences and public scrutiny. That brings me to the end of the video. As always, a like and a comment would always be appreciated. Although this video didn't really explore the violence of video games, I have made a video tackling this very topic. If you're interested, just click here on the left. Alternatively, if you didn't know that mods were actually illegal, then this video on the right is for you. Take care.